This video is for my Ceramics 1 students who are coming up with designs for their slab projects, and this is supposed to help them translate their designs into the shapes that they need to make their three-dimensional forms out of construction paper. So when you have gotten to the point, students, where you have done your step 1, where you've drawn a profile view and you have some surface design, then you go to step 2, which is where you are drawing the blown out explosion view. Okay, the blown out explosion view will show the shape of the bottom and the sides, so you should have a clear understanding of how many sides you have and what those will approximately look like. Now, this sheet, which is on the table tent, on the tables, will also be linked in the Google Doc in the video description. This is a little poster that my students can use at home, or those of you who aren't my students, you can use this as reference as well. These next few steps here, steps, 3 through 6, they go over some considerations for model building. One of the things that I always tell my kids is if you can make your design out of paper, you can make it out of clay. So the hardest thing about this project is actually making the model. Getting the model to work. Once you have that, it's smooth sailing pretty much. Now, when you are first initially drawing your piece, you're just drawing it from a profile view. Okay, you're just drawing it straight from the side, so we know, okay, that's what it's going to look like. Then when you go to do the blown out explosion view, you're going to articulate how many sides does the base have, okay? And whether or not, do you have an arch, is it a flat bottom, that sort of thing. So in the case of this one, I had to draw the bottom of the side as an arch, but my bottom itself is a rectangle. Now keep in mind that one of the requirements that my students have for this project is we aren't using any squares or rectangles for our forms unless it's an arched bottom. Otherwise, if you look at this side, it was a rectangle, but I modified the top so it's no longer a true rectangle. It makes it a little bit more interesting for us. I found before that requirement, my kids had a lot of very boring boxes. So no squares or rectangles unless it's an arched bottom. When you are drawing the base, it should be clear at the corners where the corner of the sides meet and where the corner of the base meet. You don't want to have something that's super rounded and unclear. You have to have definition. Now, when you begin with creating your construction paper form, begin with the most complex side. So in the case of this one, that's a rectangle on the bottom. It's fairly much like a rectangle here. I would begin with one of these big curvy sides. If I were doing, say, this pot, okay, this is not symmetrical at all, I would have begun with the base. The base is the most complicated side when I did this. So it has the most curves, and I would cut that out first. So begin with the most complicated side. For my students, I try to get them to think about their eventual size that they want. The size dimensions that I have given to my students in the past are 6 inches by 4 inches, but because we have the pandemic right now and they have their take-home bins, we can be a little bit smaller with that. Now, when you have decided what is your most complicated side, if it is supposed to appear symmetrical, you want to make sure it is indeed symmetrical, and the way to do that is to make sure that you are using a line of symmetry. Students, I have large construction paper in my room, or if you're at remote right now, I'm standing at home with you. When you create your line of symmetry, there is no reason to fold it fully in half unless you're making a giant pot. If you are doing something that is smaller, just make a line of symmetry that is less than half, okay? So let's say, for instance, I want this to be a pattern piece. I can use the existing straight edge as, say, the bottom, and I'm going to draw 1/2 of it at a time. So as I draw that, I'm drawing it on the fold, just as if you were making a little paper Valentine and you were doing a heart and you were putting it on the fold. Same thing for our pattern piece. So let's say I'm going to have a symmetrical piece, and now keeping it folded, I'm going to cut it out. So as I cut it out on the fold, I know that both sides are going to be identical. This is really important to having a piece that looks even and has it look good. Without the line of symmetry, if you're just freehanding either side, it's going to look wonky and it will look off. Okay? Now, when you look at this, you want to think about, oh, is that the eventual size you want? Sometimes kids don't quite understand the proportion. You know, if maybe you were going for something like this, but whoa, you folded it too big and you made it too fat. So think about your proportion, think about the eventual size. If you wanted to have, say, a pass-through or something like that, and again, it's supposed to be in the middle, you want to use a line of symmetry. And if you're doing something that is like really precise, you could certainly use something like a template or just an object to trace if you wanted it, you know, super even. So here I'm just doing an oval, and I will trim this out. Okay. And then when I unfold it, I know that that would be symmetrical. Something like this could have a tube as a pass-through, just like this form has a tube, okay? If you are going to make your piece where all sides are the same or close to it, in the case of this, it has an arch, then you take that piece and you trace it onto another piece, and you can then cut that out. And by the way, I didn't mention it, but as you're cutting your pieces out, try to cut them out in the corner of the paper so you're not inadvertently wasting paper. Now, one thing to note about arched sides. If you are creating an arched bottom, okay, note that the arch should be shown on the actual pattern. So if it's flat, that's totally fine. It can curve. So like even if your base is not straight, it can curve with a flat bottom. But if you are doing an arch, you should draw it with the arch on it and cut it out. So if this is going to have an arch, let's say like that, okay, again, I folded it and I have the line of symmetry, and then I will just cut that out. Now, boom, that could be an arched base. Okay. If you are attempting to make an arched base that perhaps has a double arch going this side and this side, that's a little bit more complicated to make the base, and I can show you that in a minute. I will get to that in a minute. If you're making a form that is four-sided and all sides are identical and symmetrical, cut out your first one and then trace it 3 more times. Now, I will get to the bottom in just a minute on how you can modify a square or a rectangle if you are doing a form where it's not arched. I'll get to that. Let's say, for instance, I wanted to make a form like this, where I have like a front and a back that are the same, and then I'm going to have sides that just connect them. So it's almost like a rectangle, but again, I'm modifying it. Or it could be, the rectangle could be like tilted outward at the top or tilted outward at the bottom. So you could have something, a variation on a rectangle. Now, if I wanted to do something like this where I have 2 sides that are identical with a connector, and let's just call it a rectangle right now. Okay, so let's say I have something like this. I want to show you the trick. If you have a straight edge that is going to meet this edge, I wanted to show you how you can measure this side. Sometimes kids wrongly assume that they can just measure the height of this and then they make a rectangle. So if this is like 9 inches tall, they think they can make a 9-inch rectangle. But they haven't accounted for the distance of the curve. So the easy trick that I have without using a ruler involves using string. So if you start out with your piece cut, you can take a piece of string and you can kind of, let's say, walk it around the edge here. So I'm just kind of making it go right along the edge so it's matching the contour. And then when I get to the end, I will snip that. Now, when I straighten this out, this string will be the length that I need for the rectangle or for the straight side. So that is my length. Now, let's say, for instance, I want to have it expand. I want it to maybe get bigger at the top or bigger at the bottom. Well, what I can do is I'm going to use the line of symmetry again. All right, so now this is going to be the piece for my connector side for kind of a rectangle. If I wanted it to be straight, I could quite simply just measure the distance and I could cut that at rectangle and it would work. But let's say I want it tapered. Maybe I want it to be skinnier at one part and wider at another part. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to make a hash mark where I want the skinny part, and then I'm going to taper it outward and make it angle just a little bit like that. Okay, so now I can trim that. And I can just eyeball this. This is just going to be straight. If I wanted a ruler, I can make a nice straight edge there. Okay, but now this is a tapered piece, okay, and that will match my curve. So perhaps I want the bottom a little bit fatter and the top a little bit skinnier. Okay, that will work. The string is a great trick to measure anytime you have any curve. So here I could kind of measure the length of the curve, and then I have my rectangle that is the same length as the curve as the length of the string, and that will match. That is illustrated on this poster right there. Okay, I'm showing how you can take a string and measure it. Okay, let's talk about making a base. To make a base, you need to make sure that you're taking the width of it by the length of it, and you can start off by making it approximately a rectangle. Now, if you're doing an arch, it can be a true rectangle or a square. So here I would measure the length of this from corner to corner with the string, and then I would measure the length of the side. So if you do the complex side first, if they're all the same, that's fine. You can trace them and then do a more simple side. And then let's move on to the base. So if in the case of this one, this is going to go around, okay, so you can see it's going to kind of fit in there. Okay, so students, remember that if you're doing a rectangular base, a rectangle can only be used if you're arching it. It's going to be arched, okay? Now, the modified rectangle can be a rectangle that's modified, either the sides are sunken in and the corners are more pointy, or maybe you poof out the sides. And it's a very simple thing to do, to modify. So if you take your original rectangle and you fold your paper in quarters, or your original square, okay? If you fold it in quarters, and if you make it just a little bit bigger than you think you might need it, that's helpful. So what I did for this one was I left the corner as the existing corner, and then I just kind of scooped in the sides a little bit. And so when I cut it out, and again, this is on the fold, so I'm using 2 lines of symmetry with this, and when I cut it out, it would result in something like this. Okay, if you wanted to do the opposite, if you wanted to do one like this, where it's poofed out on the sides, okay, in the case of this one, okay, again, I folded it into quarters, and I'll hold it like that. And then I dropped the corner in a little bit, and I bowed it, okay? So the widest point is on the existing edges, and I drop the corner in and get a little bit. If you make the original rectangle just a tad bit bigger, that will allow a little extra space so your base will still fit. Okay, so I'm going to make a rectangular base for this, and then I'm going to modify it and make it poofed out like that. So in order to make the rectangular base, I am going to use a 90-degree corner of my existing paper, and I'm just going to use the actual pattern to mark this. You can certainly use a ruler if you want, but if I just mark it with the pattern, that's sometimes helpful because I know it should be the same. I'm only using a marker so you all can see a little bit better. And then here I'm going to use the other pattern to get the width of it. So this is the size that my rectangle would need to be if I were building it straight on there, and it's going to be a straight rectangle. So this is going to be I'm going to just mark this so I know which side is the curvy side. So I'm calling this the curvy side. Okay. Now if I'm going to poof it out though, here's one trick that I need to do. I need to make this a little bit bigger. So I'm just eyeballing this. I'm making it about 1/4 of an inch or just maybe a smidge more. Okay. When I cut this out, so I plan on making it a little bit bigger because I'm going to be kind of poofing it, and it's going to take away some of the length of it. So you can see how much I added on there. Okay. Now I'm going to fold this into quarters. Okay. So just like I showed on this one, it's now folded into quarters. The fold is here and here, okay? Now I'm going to modify the outer edge by dropping down the corner. So let me kind of mark this. I'm going to drop down the corner and curve the side. So this is what it's going to look like. And let's unfold it. Okay, so the side where it said curvy, that should be the side that still fits, and that looks like it will fit just fine.
And here I'm just cutting out the remaining pattern pieces so I can show you the assembly process with masking tape. And I'm starting off by placing tape on all of the sides of the base before I actually start to attach sides.
Now, when I'm beginning to assemble my piece, I often start with the base, and I will put tape on the base because this is curved. I'm going to just kind of gently curve it around as I'm taping it and trying not to leave gaps. Okay. Now, when I'm ready to make the sides attached, I'm going to first of all put tape on the curvy piece. And then I will bend the straight edge around to match. And there we go. So put the tape on the curved piece and then get the straight edges to match. Okay, and again, this is not a rectangle because this is skinnier than down here. One last consideration, let's say you have a piece that you wanted it to be arched on every single side. So let's pretend that I have a four-sided piece, and I want it to have 4 legs. So I'm starting off with a square that would theoretically fit the arches, okay? So the length of the sides of the square do fit the arches. But now I need to make it kind of come down and have, it needs to fit inside the leg so that it sits on a leg and it's not sitting on a side. Okay, so as I do that, it can't curve in 2 directions. So I'm going to use this as a starting point, and I'm going to redraw this, and I'm doing it approximately in the 90-degree corner of the paper, but I'm making it a little bit bigger, so I'm expanding it out just a little bit. Because again, just like I did with the poofed, I want to expand the corners a little bit outward from where it normally is. Okay. So I've extended the corners outward beyond where the original square was, but then I'm going to drop in this a little bit. Now this is a little bit of a trial and error. Okay, I need to kind of reshape it so it's not a true square, because it won't work. It won't fit as well. So I'm just doing this approximately. Okay. Now, as I look at this, I want to see, is this going to fit? Okay, and it's going to be just a little extra long, which is actually what I want. I just want a little extra length, because as I put together those legs, I want it to stick out a little bit extra there at the corner. So I think that would potentially work. So in other words, I just elongated the corners of the base just a little bit more to extend beyond here to allow for a little extra clearance when I put that together to create the legs.